Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
I never thought a simple dinner could detonate like that, casual, warm, familiar, and then suddenly turn into a slow-motion car crash you can't look away from. It was a Sunday, same as always. My parents like routine. Mom had made her famous pot roast, and Dad was already pouring his second glass of bourbon before I'd taken my coat off. The smell of roasted carrots and beef broth filled the house, something that usually calmed me, but that day it just made me nauseous. My wife Sophie gave me that glance, the one that said, "Just get through it, and we can leave after pie." We'd done this 100 times. Sit down, smile, tolerate Jake. But today wasn't like the others. Jake arrived late, as usual. Hair slicked back like he was still 23, leather jacket even though it was nearly 90 degrees outside. He swaggered in with that same cocky grin like we were all just extras in the movie of his life. He greeted Mom with a loud kiss, clapped Dad on the shoulder like they were bar buddies instead of father and son, and gave Sophie a wink that made my stomach twist. I didn't say anything. I never do right away. I let Jake burn himself out first. Dinner started off fine, surface-level conversation, the way families do when they're too scared to be honest. Mom asked about Sophie's work, Dad complained about the cost of gas, and Jake talked about Jake. Some half-baked story about a business venture out in Austin or Denver, I can't remember. Something about real estate and NFTs, some bullshit buzzwords that meant nothing but sounded impressive to people who stopped learning new things in 2007. Sophie raised her eyebrows at me across the table, silently begging me not to laugh. Then it happened. Jake leaned back in his chair, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and dropped it like it was nothing. "Hey, Mark," he said, casual like he was asking to borrow the remote. "Listen, I need to talk to you about something. It's kind of serious." Right away, I knew where it was going. I'd heard that tone before. That mix of false humility and unearned expectation. "I need 10 grand, he said. Just like that. $10,000. Like it was pocket change. He didn't look at anyone when he said it, just me. Like it was already decided. Sophie froze mid-bite. Mom looked down into her mashed potatoes like they were a magic 8-ball that might offer her an escape. Dad's jaw twitched, just once, but he stayed quiet. That was his thing. Act like silence makes you wise. It doesn't. I put my fork down. Not because I was surprised, but because I wanted him to see I was done eating his bullshit. "No," I said. One word. No hesitation. Jake blinked. Like it hadn't even crossed his mind that I'd say no. "What?" He laughed, like maybe I was joking. "Dude, it's just 10 grand. "It's not just anything," I said, steady. "And I'm not giving it to you." The silence was loud. It stretched across the table like barbed wire. Sophie reached over and put a hand on my leg under the table, like she knew what was about to come. Jake sat forward now. The smile was gone. His voice rose. "You owe me, man. You fucking owe me." He slammed his hand on the table hard enough that Mom flinched. "You think I forgot what I did for you in college?" I didn't say anything. I didn't move. But that's when the air changed. That's when everything in that room bent under the weight of what he'd just said. Sophie turned to look at me, her hand now gripping my thigh tighter. My parents froze like someone had hit pause. You could almost hear the gears turning in their heads. Jake kept going. "You remember that night, huh? That party? I covered for you. I saved your ass. You'd be in prison if it weren't for me." And that's when I looked him right in the eye, and I said it, calm as a church bell in winter. "Fine. Let's talk about what you really covered." You ever watch someone's soul try to climb back inside their body? That was Jake in that moment. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. He looked at Mom, at Dad, at Sophie. But it was too late. The words were out. Everyone had heard him. Everyone saw the mask crack. Mom went pale. Dad clenched his fist so tight his knuckles turned white. Sophie's hand let go of mine slowly. And me? I didn't move an inch. Because the truth is, I've been waiting for that moment for 20 damn years. Every birthday, every holiday, every single time Jake called himself the hero of the family, I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. I carried that night like a ghost in my pocket, knowing someday it would come out to breathe. So yeah, Jake wanted to open that door? Fine. He kicked it down himself. Now we're all walking through it. And I'm done pretending I don't remember what really happened that night. Everyone just heard what you said, Jake, I said, my voice steady, like I'd rehearsed it 1,000 times. So now I'm done protecting you. Back then, I was maybe 19, maybe 21, hell, time blurs. I remember it was senior year. Yeah, I was 22. The math probably doesn't check out, but I've never trusted my own memory when it comes to that night. That night didn't feel like a memory, it felt like a bad photograph, overexposed in all the wrong places, leaving out everything I really needed to see. All I knew for sure was I woke up the next morning with a splitting headache, blood on my knuckles, and a campus security officer knocking on my dorm room door like he was delivering death. The party was supposed to be a blow-off, a classic end-of-semester mess of cheap beer, louder music, and even louder regrets. I went to Delta Tau because someone said they had jungle juice so strong it made you forget your own name. And maybe that's exactly what I wanted that night, to forget. My grades were fine, my life was boring, my girlfriend had just dumped me by text message, and I was too much of a coward to admit I actually missed her. So I went, drank, danced, shouted, blacked out. It wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last, but it was the only time I woke up with people staring at me like I'd done something unforgivable. Jake wasn't even supposed to be there. He was still in high school back then, a punk kid with a fake ID and a reckless streak wider than the Mississippi. He idolized college life like it was a goddamn movie, and he used to sneak up to visit me, pretending he had somewhere else to be. I let him crash on the floor sometimes, didn't think much of it, until that night. Because apparently, he crashed the party too. He showed up while I was halfway through my third red solo cup of whatever the hell was in that barrel and vanished into the crowd like he owned the place. The next morning, everything felt wrong. I couldn't remember what I'd done, but people were looking at me like I'd lit the building on fire. I kept hearing whispers, Mark. That guy. Are they serious? Nobody would tell me anything straight. Just vague accusations, glances, and then finally, the campus police who said there'd been a complaint. A girl. Her name wasn't in the file they gave me, but they said there'd been an incident on the upstairs landing sometime after midnight. My name had come up. Witnesses placed me there. My blood alcohol level was sky high. And I didn't remember a damn thing. That was when Jake stepped in. He pulled me aside outside the admin office, eyes wide and voice low, and said, "Don't say a word. Don't confess. I'll handle it." I remember that part clearly. "I'll handle it," he said, like it was some heroic gesture. Like he was stepping in to save me from my own mess. He told me he'd talk to someone. Maybe the girl, maybe someone else, it was all vague, and by the next day, the whole thing vanished. The complaint got pulled. No charges filed. The school strongly encouraged me to take a semester off. My parents were furious but relieved. Nobody asked too many questions. And Jake? He wore that shit like a badge. Anytime I questioned him about it later, he'd just laugh and say, "You owe me, bro. Big time." I figured maybe he'd smoothed it over somehow. Maybe he'd convinced the girl it wasn't serious. Maybe I really had done something and just didn't want to know. That was the sick part, I didn't want to know. I let the shame dig in, I let it settle, and I built my life around avoiding it. I told myself I was lucky. I told myself he saved me. I told myself a lot of things. But after what he said at dinner, after watching him weaponize that secret like a loaded gun pointed at my head, I started to think about it differently. I started to wonder whose mess it really was. I started digging. I went back through some old folders my dad had kept in the attic. He saved everything, letters, notes, even some of my old college stuff. In a yellow envelope was a letter from the school dated April 2003. It wasn't addressed to me, it was addressed to my father. In it, The dean referenced a misunderstanding involving both sons. Both sons. I read that part again. That didn't make sense. I was the one enrolled. Jake wasn't even on the radar, officially. So why the hell would they mention both of us? I started emailing, calling. I reached out to an old classmate who'd been at the party. He didn't remember much either, but he remembered seeing Jake arguing with someone at the bottom of the stairs. I think he was trying to get some girl's attention, he said. But she was freaked out. Looked like she was trying to get away. My hands were shaking when I typed the name into my laptop. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly. A clue. A post. Anything. And then there it was, the blog. A dusty little blog with 3 posts and a picture that stopped my breath cold. It was her. I didn't know her name back then. I do now. Emily Cartwright. And she remembers everything. It took me 3 days to get a reply from the email I sent her. Emily Cartwright, the girl from that night, the one whose face I hadn't seen clearly in 2 decades, but had haunted the corners of my memory like a ghost I refused to name. When her message came through, I opened it like it might explode in my hands. I half expected anger, confusion, or nothing at all. But instead, she wrote just one line. If you really want to talk, I'm ready. We met in a coffee shop on the edge of town, the kind with chipped paint on the walls and bad acoustic covers playing just loud enough to make sure nothing ever felt private. She walked in wearing a long gray coat and a scarf, even though the weather didn't ask for it. She spotted me right away, and I knew she'd recognized me too, despite the years. There was a tightness to her smile, a sort of restraint that said, I'm here, but don't mistake this for forgiveness. I thanked her for coming, though the words felt hollow even as I said them. We sat across from each other, 2 strangers tethered by one awful night. I didn't know how to start. She helped me out. You really don't remember anything, do you? She asked, stirring a cup of tea that had no sugar, no milk, just heat. I shook my head slowly, ashamed all over again. Only fragments, I said. Noise. A staircase. My brother saying he'd fix it. She nodded, and for a moment, she looked away. When she spoke again, it was quieter. I wasn't even supposed to be there, she said. My roommate dragged me out. Said we needed one night of fun before finals. She laughed a little, but it was bitter, hollow. You were already out of it when I got there. Drunk beyond reasoning. Stumbling. I remember thinking someone should have cut you off hours earlier. I stayed silent. I had no defense, not even after all these years. I went upstairs to use the bathroom, she said, her voice steady now, like she'd practiced these words in the mirror before coming. He followed me. Not you, him. Jake. He cornered me on the landing. He smelled like weed and whiskey. Tried to act charming, like he knew me. I didn't even know his name. I said no. He didn't like that. Tried to push himself on me, hands on my waist, mouth too close. My fists curled under the table, nails digging into my palms. I shoved him off. She went on, unflinching now. He stumbled, hit the wall, cursed at me, called me a bitch. I ran downstairs, told a friend. She told campus security. And then the next day, everything got weird. They said it was you. They said multiple people saw you up there, that you were drunk and belligerent. That you'd gotten aggressive. She stared at me now, eyes dark, unwavering. I didn't see her face clearly that night, but I remembered the voice. And it wasn't yours. I tried to tell them. But someone, your dad, I think, called me. He said you were being sent home, that you were getting help. He said the one who hurt me was gone, and he promised it wouldn't happen again. He offered to pay for therapy, for silence. And I was tired. I was scared. So I let it go. I felt something heavy and cold settle in my chest. A weight I hadn't known was mine. He told you I was gone, I repeated. She nodded. He told me you were leaving, and that the other one, the real one, was dealt with. So I didn't press charges. I wanted to scream, to cry, to punch a wall, to go back 20 years and drag Jake down those stairs myself. But instead, I just sat there and whispered, "He lied to you." She didn't respond right away. She just looked at me like someone who had finally seen the full picture and didn't like any part of it. After we parted ways, I drove in silence. No music, no podcasts, just the sound of tires on pavement and the thousand thoughts tearing through my skull. Jake had used me like a body shield, and our father had helped him do it. I stopped at a gas station on the way home, not to fill up, but because I needed air. I stood in the parking lot, hands on my knees, wondering how many times I'd thanked Jake over the years for saving me. When I got home, I pulled out an old lockbox from the attic. Inside were tax papers, birth certificates, and a bunch of envelopes marked with dates. One stood out, April 2003. Inside, a check copywritten from my dad to Jake for $8,000, memo line marked spring tuition. Only Jake wasn't enrolled in anything. He'd never even applied to college that year. That money wasn't tuition. It was silence. I stared at it until the sun went down, until Sophie found me there on the floor and asked what was going on. I didn't answer her. Not yet. I just stared at that check like it was a crime scene photo. You lied to save yourself, Jake. I took your guilt for 20 years. Now it's your turn. The turkey was dry, the wine was too sweet, and the whole house felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for the storm nobody could see coming. Thanksgiving at my parents' place was always a little stiff, a little forced, a lot of pretending. This year, though, the air had a weight to it, like the walls knew what was about to go down before the people in them did. I hadn't spoken to Jake since the dinner explosion 3 weeks earlier, and the silence between us had become its own kind of loud. But he still showed up, of course he did, walking in with that same swagger, grinning like a man with no shame left to lose. He handed my mom a bottle of wine like that erased everything, gave my dad a slap on the back like they were still on the same team, and then sat across from me with a smirk that said he thought he still held the upper hand. He didn't. I'd spent the last 3 weeks digging through memories I'd spent years trying to forget, talking to people I hadn't spoken to since college, and looking into bank records, disciplinary reports, anything that could prove what I already knew in my bones. But I didn't come here to show paperwork. I came here to break him open in front of everyone, in the only language he understood: control. I knew Jake. I knew how to pull his strings without ever raising my voice. And tonight, I was going to play him like a piano. Dinner was tense from the start. My mom tried to act normal, passing dishes like she wasn't dying inside. My dad barely spoke, just carved the turkey like it was a problem he could solve with a sharp enough knife. Sophie sat beside me, quiet but alert, her fork moving food around more than actually eating it. Jake filled the silence with small talk and jokes that fell flat, pretending nothing had happened, pretending he hadn't detonated the family's fragile peace with one sentence and a smirk. He thought if he just acted like everything was fine, it would be. That was always his trick: rewrite the story loud enough, and people forget what really happened. I waited until dessert. That's when everyone's guard drops. That's when they start to think maybe they made it through another holiday without blood on the tablecloth. My mom was bringing out the pumpkin pie when I cleared my throat and said, "Jake, remember that night in college you covered for me?" The room froze. Forks hovered. My mom's hand trembled just enough for the pie to shift on the plate. Jake looked up from his coffee with those wide, innocent eyes he'd perfected since childhood. "Man, are we really bringing that up again?" he said with a laugh that didn't quite land. "Water under the bridge, right?" "Yeah," I said calmly, like I was just reminiscing. But I was thinking about it, trying to remember the details. Funny how it all went down, huh? He narrowed his eyes a little, sensing the trap but not quite seeing it yet. "You were blackout drunk," he said, leaning back like he was schooling me on my own life. "You don't remember anything." That's why I stepped in. "That's the thing," I said, leaning forward now, voice still even. "I didn't remember anything until recently." His jaw tightened, barely, just enough for me to notice. I kept going, slow and steady. I talked to Emily, Jake. His coffee cup froze midair, clinked back onto the saucer. I found her blog. Reached out. She responded. Turns out she remembers everything. The stairs. The jacket. The voice that wasn't mine. My dad looked up then. Really looked up. My mom was staring at her lap like maybe if she didn't move, she could disappear. Jake's voice dropped. You don't know what you're talking about. Oh, but I do, I said. I know you showed up at that party uninvited. I know you followed her upstairs. I know Dad paid you off after. Called it tuition. Want to see the check? Jake's face went red. He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again, the words fumbling like loose change in a pocket. You were drunk, he snapped. No one would have believed you over me. And there it was. The crack. The slip. The confession. My mom gasped, barely audible. My dad stood up, face pale with something I'd never seen before, not anger, but something close to disgust. Sophie just stared at Jake like he was a stranger who'd walked into our house and pissed on the rug. You bastard, Dad whispered, voice shaking. We protected the wrong son. Jake tried to backpedal, of course. You knew what could have happened to him, he said, eyes wide. I didn't hurt her. Nothing happened. But you tried, I said. And you let me carry it for you. My mom started crying, her hands shaking so bad the pie fell to the floor. No one moved to clean it up. Jake looked around like a man looking for an escape route that didn't exist. And me? I sat there, calm as a priest at a funeral, watching the structure of lies he'd built come crumbling down around him. He stood, knocking his chair back. You think you're better than me? He shouted, but his voice cracked halfway through. No, I said, standing too, leveling my gaze at him. I just finally stopped pretending I'm worse. There was a silence after that thick choking. Like the moment before a storm hits, when the pressure changes and everything feels off-kilter. Jake stormed out without another word. My father followed, not to stop him, but to make sure he left. My mother just wept. Sophie didn't say anything until we were driving home. And, even then, she just asked one question. Do you feel better now? I didn't answer right away. I watched the empty road, the headlights cutting through the dark like a knife through guilt. I don't know, I finally said. I think I just feel finished. But I wasn't. Not really. Because revenge feels good for about 5 minutes. Then it just feels like ash in your mouth. You ruined your own life, Jake. I just gave you the match. The days after Thanksgiving felt like winter came early, not in the weather, but in the way everything suddenly froze between people who once shared warmth. No texts from Jake, no calls, not even one of those cheap apology attempts he used to toss around like confetti when his back was against the wall. It was like he vanished, just like that, as if by saying the truth out loud I'd exorcised him from the family completely. And maybe I had. But the absence didn't feel like victory, it felt like vacuum, like silence with edges sharp enough to cut skin. My dad didn't speak to me for 5 days after that dinner. Then a letter came, real old school, postmarked from 2 towns over where he'd holed up in somebody's cabin. He didn't sign it with love or dad, just scribbled his name at the bottom like it was a resignation form. The letter was short, barely a page, and every sentence read like it had been chewed on before being written down. He said he knew. Said he'd known since that morning in 2003, when Jake came home looking more rattled than he'd ever seen him, claiming I'd gotten mixed up in something bad and begging Dad to handle it quietly. Said he talked to a friend in the school board, someone who owed him a favor. Said he pulled the right strings, shut the right mouths, and told himself it was just to keep the family intact. Then he admitted something else, that a part of him always knew it wasn't me, that the timelines didn't make sense, that my hangover wasn't the kind you get from guilt, but from confusion. He said he convinced himself it didn't matter. That I'd recover, move on, do something decent with my life, which I did. And Jake? He said Jake was already broken and that maybe he didn't want to break him more. I chose the son I thought could carry it, he wrote. I didn't ask if he should. I stared at that line for a long time, longer than I want to admit. Because buried beneath it was something I hadn't wanted to face, The only reason the truth stayed buried so long was because I was the type who could live with it. I could bottle it up, compress it, swallow it down like poison with a smile. And in doing that, maybe I did become the man they all assumed I was. My mother never spoke of it again. At least not out loud. She went back to humming in the kitchen and folding laundry like nothing had changed, though I noticed she started keeping the guest bedroom door shut at all times. She set 4 plates at the table even when it was just the 3 of us. She asked how Jake was, but only once, and only in a voice so soft it barely counted as asking. Sophie, on the other hand, was not so gentle. She cornered me one night while we were brushing our teeth, her eyes narrowed in the mirror like she was looking through me instead of at me. "I'm proud of you," she said, toothpaste still on her lips. "But why the hell didn't you tell me sooner?" I didn't have a clean answer. I told her the truth, or at least the part one could articulate, that I didn't know how to bring it up, that I thought it would ruin things, that I had convinced myself it was dead and buried. But more than that, I told her I didn't want her to look at me differently. And I think that hurt her more than anything else. I spent the next week trying to go back to normal. But normal, once shattered, doesn't reassemble, it just pretends. I worked, I cooked, I walked the dog, I mowed the lawn like the blades might slice through the weight in my chest. But the quiet didn't feel like peace. It felt like holding your breath for too long, waiting for the air to return. So I drove out to see Emily again. Not to apologize, though maybe I should have, but because I needed to see what it looked like when someone else survived the same wreckage. She agreed to meet, no hesitation in her voice this time. We sat at the same coffee shop, same seats, but the silence between us felt different now. Not heavy, just real. "I heard he left town," she said, sipping her tea. "Jake." "I think he did," I replied. "No one knows where. And no one's really looking." She nodded, not smiling, not frowning, just accepting. That makes sense. I almost asked her if she was okay, but I didn't. Because that would have been selfish. What I did ask, after a long pause, was, does it help? Knowing it wasn't forgotten. She looked at me for a while before answering. Then she said something that stuck with me, maybe forever. "I'm not sure it matters anymore. Closure is just a pretty word for trying to rewrite something ugly." I nodded, and we sat there a few minutes longer. Right before I left, as I stood up and reached for my coat, she asked the question I'd been dreading since the day I found her name. "Why did it take you 20 years to speak up?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Not a word. Because there was no answer that didn't make me look like a coward or a liar or both. I just nodded again, the weight of the question wrapping around my chest like chains, and walked out into the cold. On the drive home, I thought about all the things we never say to each other. All the things we bury because we think silence is mercy, or strength, or wisdom. But maybe silence is just fear dressed up in good intentions. Maybe the real sin isn't what we do, but what we refuse to name. Sometimes silence is survival, but sometimes it's just cowardice in disguise.